So good afternoon, folks. My name is Karen Grant. I am the Deputy Director of Medical Studies at Lancaster Medical School. Welcome to our session on preparing for BMAT, which we use in our selection process. So today's session has got a number of different elements. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Rachel Rudge and I'll let her introduce herself. And she's going to tell you a bit about the biomedical admissions test itself. Then Rachel's going to hand over to her colleague Paul Crump, and Paul's going to show you some of the different question formats that you might come across when you're taking the biomedical admissions test, and you'll have a chance to answer some questions during the session at that point. Then we're going to go back to Rachel and she'll explain to you a little bit about the resources that are available to help you prepare for BMAT. And these are the resources that admissions testing provide for free through their website. And then after we've heard from Rachel again, we're going to hear from two of our first year students. Let me get this right. Helen and Nidhi are going to talk to you about their experiences of preparing for and taking the biomedical admissions test, including their kind of top tips for what to do. Very end of this session will be me telling you a little bit about how BMAT is used in our selection processes. And also kind of giving you an idea of what kind of score should you be aiming for to be competitive at Lancaster Medical School. So that's the format of today's session. And I now need to hand over to Rachel. And so I need to stop presenting and she will start presenting. So if I stop presenting, Rachel, can you start?
I will do. I'll just share my screen. Can you see my screen okay?
We can, thank you.
Get that into the right mode. Okay, hi everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon to learn about BMAT. I'm going to provide a bit of an introduction to the test, a little bit of information about why the universities use it. Then I'm going to hand over to Paul, who will run you through some questions, and then we'll look at preparation and a few FAQs. So why do universities use BMAT? Well, certain universities ask applicants to their medical, biomedical and dentistry courses to take BMAT. And when you take the test, this gives the universities one common piece of information about everybody that's applying. That means that they can compare everybody fairly, no matter what their background and their, what kind of education they've had and so on. This is the one thing that everybody will have in common. So it's a really good point of comparison for the universities. And it also helps them identify whether you have the right kind of skills to succeed on your chosen course at university as well. Don't forget, it is just one part of the application process. So they will also be looking at your UCAS form, your school grades, if you're called to interview, how you perform. So it's this whole picture of what you're like and what you can do. So here at BMAT, we write the test and we mark it, and then we pass the results to the universities, and they may use the results in different ways. And Karen's going to tell you a bit about how Lancaster use BMAT results, but for other universities, please do check their websites to find out how they use the results as part of the admissions process. These are the UK universities and courses that require BMAT. You don't need to write these down because these are available on our website. There are a couple of UK universities that use BMAT for international applicants only, and we also operate globally as well. It's used by universities around the world, but these are the UK universities and courses that require BMAT. So what is in the test? What's in BMAT? So BMAT is a 2-hour test in 3 sections, and you take them one section after the other. Section 1 is thinking skills. This is testing your generic problem solving and critical thinking ability. And there are 60 minutes to answer 32 multiple choice questions. That is followed by the scientific knowledge and applications section, section 2. And in this you have 27 multiple choice questions testing your ability to apply your understanding of biology, chemistry, physics and maths to new questions within 30 minutes. The level of the knowledge that you're expected to have is, well, because we operate globally, we say it's the level typically covered at school by the age of 16. So within the UK, that is GCSE level. Okay, so that's testing your ability to apply your GCSE level knowledge of biology, chemistry, physics and maths. Section 3 is the final part. It's a writing task. It's one short essay question. You have a choice of 3 topics to answer on, and you just pick one that you answer the question on. It's very short. It's an A4 page or up to 550 words, and you have 30 minutes to answer this part of the test. And this is testing your ability to communicate your ideas effectively in writing. But Paul will give a bit more information about that a bit later. Anyway, I'm going to hand over to Paul now so that he can start looking through some questions with you.
Thanks, Rachel. Good afternoon, everybody. So yes, as Rachel mentioned, I'm going to show you some example questions and also give you an opportunity to have a go at a couple of questions as well. So the first slide you can see on screen here is an example of a problem-solving question. This is from section 1, and I can see that someone's already asked the question, are we allowed a calculator in the exam? The answer to that is no, you're not allowed a calculator. But actually a calculator wouldn't be that much help in section 1 anyway, because the level of maths required is very basic, well below GCSE level. You are allowed pen and paper though to actually scrap paper to do your workings out on, and I recommend that you do use that. So as Rachel mentioned, there are 2 types of question in section 1, critical thinking and problem solving. Problem solving is numerical and spatial reasoning. And this is an example of a type of problem solving question that we call finding procedures, where the task is really to work out a method for solving the item. So I'll just give you a moment to read through this question. So you can see you've got the problem and you've got 5 options. All of the questions in section 1 will be in this 5 option multiple choice format. There are 32 questions in 60 minutes. So you've got just under 2 minutes per question. So I'm going to give you just under 2 minutes now, probably about a minute and a half, to have a think through and see if you can work through this question. Good idea if you've got a pen and paper to hand to do some jotting down, and then I think there'll be an opportunity for you to enter your answer in a poll. But first I'll give you a minute and a half to have a go at this one. Okay, all right, well, I'm pleased to say that the majority are right. We've got 64% going for option D, and D is in fact the right answer. I'll just explain briefly how the question works. So you know the values of each of the letters, sorry, each of the words, but you don't know the value of any of the individual letters. How are you going to work out the value of individual letters? Well, if you start with the word tear, T-E-A-R, and subtract the word rat, subtract the total value of the word rat, that will give you the value of the letter E. And once you know the value of the letter E, if you take the word tree and subtract 2 times the value of E, you'll then know the value of TR combined, not the individual letters T and R, but TR combined. So once you know TR combined, if you go back to the word tear and subtract TR plus E, which you already know, that will give you the value of A. And then finally, if you take the word right, R-I-T-E, and subtract the value of TR and E, that will give you the value of I. So you should be able to work out the values of E, A and I. So the answer is D3. Don't worry, by the way, if you found that hard. BMAT is designed to be hard. These question types will be unfamiliar to most of you. So don't worry if you found it hard. We're not expecting people to get all of these questions right. We're just showing you some examples of the questions and giving you an opportunity to answer, just to make the session a little bit more interesting and a little bit more interactive. So that's an example of a problem-solving question. If we could go to the next slide, please, Rachel. So this is an example now of another type of Section 1 thinking skills question, and these are critical thinking questions. So whereas problem solving is numerical and spatial reasoning, critical thinking is more verbal reasoning. The questions typically look like this. They have a passage of text, and the text will always be fairly short, about this sort of length, and it will always contain an argument of some kind, where someone is trying to persuade us of something. And the question asks candidates to evaluate the argument in some way. So to say, for example, in this case, what's the main conclusion of the argument? Or it might be, what's the flaw in the reasoning in this argument? Or perhaps, what assumption underlies this argument? Rachel's going to talk about some support materials later in the presentation, and there's a test specification document where you can see all the various different types of critical thinking and problem solving questions. But I'll just give you a moment now just to read through the text and the question and the 5 possible options. Okay, so you've got an argument and you've got a question asking you what is the main conclusion. One thing to notice about the 5 options is all of the 5 options are contained within the passage. So it's not that any of the options have been created outside of the passage, they're all there. But what you've got to decide is which one is the main conclusion. What is the main point that the writer of this argument is trying to convince us of? Okay, so I'll give you a few seconds to just think that through and think what you think is the main argument, and then we'll go with the poll again for this question. Okay, I think that's everybody. So again, very well done, everybody. The majority have the right answer. The answer, oh, sorry, no, the majority don't have the right answer here. So the majority have gone for D. Actually, the right answer is B in this case. It would be preferable to have a totally vegetarian agriculture. So this is quite tricky because it's often very difficult to decide what is the main conclusion. And sometimes people think that the conclusion is what comes at the end. But in this case, we're told that organic farming improves the environment, and then we're told it would be preferable to have a totally vegetarian agriculture. This is the main point that the writer is making here. The rest of this passage about, you know, the percentage of vegetable matter fed to animals passing straight through, eating vegetables directly would mean that less land would have to be farmed. These are really supporting reasons. These are evidence to support the main conclusion. They're not the main conclusion itself. That comes in the second sentence in B. Again, don't worry if you found this hard. Don't worry if it was unfamiliar to you, because we expect that this type of question will be new to candidates. So you will find, as you do more practice, as you get more familiar with these different question types, that it starts to make more sense and it starts to become easier. So yes, that is an example of a critical thinking question. So let's move on now, please, Rachel, and we'll have a look at a science question from section 2. So section 2 is scientific knowledge and applications. As Rachel said in her introduction, the emphasis really is on the application of knowledge in section 2. The level of science content is equivalent to GCSE in UK terms, but it's about how you use that knowledge, how you apply it in a kind of problem-solving fashion. So if you look at the example on screen here, this is an example of a biology question. In section 2, you'll have a fairly equal number of maths, chemistry, biology and physics questions. There are 27 questions in 30 minutes. So section 2 is considerably more time pressured than section 1. You've got about a minute a question. If you look at the question on screen here, you'll see that you've got to do 2 things. You've got a diagram of a kidney and associated vessels from a healthy individual. And then you've got a table with, in this case, 6 options, A to F, and you have to say which of the structures has the lowest concentration of urea and which has the highest concentration of urea. So essentially you've got to do 2 things. You've got to identify the structures in the diagram, and then using a kind of problem-solving approach, decide which row of the table correctly shows the lowest and highest concentration of urea. So again, I'll give you a minute to think that through and come up with your answer, and then we'll go to the poll again for this question. Well, I'm very impressed because, again, in this case, the majority are right. The answer here is D, so well done everybody who went for option D. I'm not, I will explain this question. I should probably start by saying I'm not a scientist. I look after sections 1 and section 3, but I do understand, I think, how this question works. So I'll have a go at explaining it to you. As I said, you've got to do 2 things. You've got to identify the structures, and then you've got to look at the table and think about the concentration of urea. If you look at the diagram, you'll see that structure 1 has got a very large lumen and very thin walls, which means it's a vein, which is carrying blood at low pressure towards the heart. If you look at structure 2, you'll see it's got a small lumen and quite thick walls, which means it's an artery carrying blood at high pressure away from the heart. Structure 3 there leads from the kidney to a vein, so we can identify that as a renal vein. So I think already we can discount option C, because C says 3 is the renal artery. We can probably discount E, because E says 4 is the renal vein, and we know 3 is the renal vein. So we're already discounting some of the options. If we look at structure 4, we can see that that leads from an artery to a kidney. So that's the renal artery. And the renal artery connects the kidney to the aorta. So we can identify structure 2 as the aorta. That means we can eliminate option A, because option A says 1 is the aorta. So we're already down to options B, D and F. So now we might want to think about urea. And we probably know that kidneys remove urea from the blood. So we can work out that the lowest concentration of urea should be in section 3, in structure 3 rather, because that will contain blood that will pass, that's just passed through the healthy individual's kidney. So at that point, I think we can eliminate option B, which says that 1 is the vena cava and that has the lowest concentration of urea, and that leads us to option D, 3 being the renal vein and having the lowest concentration of urea. And if we look at structure 5, just to make sure, structure 5 is leading from the kidney. That will be the ureter leading from the kidney to the bladder, not the urethra, which we've got in F, which transports urine from the bladder to the outside of the body. So that's an example of a science question, and that just illustrates the sort of problem-solving approach that these item types take. And again, Rachel's going to talk about support materials in a moment. You'll be able to look at examples of physics, maths and chemistry questions as well, with explained answers. And there's a lot more information in the test specification document about section 2. Okay, if we could move on then, please, Rachel, to the next slide. And we're going to talk now about section 3. And section 3 is a writing task. It's a short essay, and you have to write one side of A4 if you're doing the paper-based version of the test, or 550 words maximum if you're taking the test on computer, in 30 minutes. So you don't have very long, and you're not allowed to exceed one side of A4 or 550 words. Being concise is part of the task. You'll get to choose one question from 3. The first question is always quite general. The second question has a science theme, and the third question is a medical type question. But the questions don't require any particular specialist knowledge. You should choose whichever question you feel you can write best on. Sometimes candidates think because it's a biomedical admissions test, they should write on the medical question. That's not the case. Choose the question that you feel you've got most to say about and that you can write the most persuasive and coherent argument for. In terms of the scoring of the question, you're marked on 2 scales: quality of content from 1 to 5 and quality of English from A to E. Quality of content is how well have you answered the question? Have you put together a clear, persuasive argument backed up by evidence? And quality of English is, can you write clear, correct English? It's not an English language test. We're not looking for fantastic, flowery language or wonderful vocabulary, but we do need to know that you can write clearly and correctly. Okay, so the question you can see on screen here is of the medical type, and it's asking, it says, the healthcare profession is wrong to treat aging as if it were disease. The questions will always be in this same format. No matter if they're general or scientific or medical, they will always have a statement in bold. Sometimes that statement is a quotation with a person's name attached to it, or sometimes, as you can see here, it's just a statement. And the question always has these 3 parts. I think if you click, Rachel, we'll get some animation here. So the first one is, what do you understand by the statement? So in your own words, what do you think this statement means? Secondly, give a counter argument. Okay, think of some reasons why the statement might be wrong. Give an opposite point of view. And thirdly and finally, what do you think? Do you agree or disagree? Sum up and give your particular view on this, backed up by a reason or some evidence. Thanks, Rachel. So in terms of a possible plan, and this is only a possible plan, this is not the only way you can approach section 3 essays, but you could start with an introduction explaining what the statement means, then give 1 or 2 reasons for the statement, then give 1 or 2 reasons against the statement, and then finish with your strongest reason, either for or against. It says here on the slide for, but it could be that you decide you don't agree with the statement. That's fine. It doesn't really matter whether you agree or disagree with the statement, as long as you say whether you disagree or agree clearly and give reasons for your opinion and decision. Okay, moving on to the next slide then. So I'll finish by just talking a little bit about how BMAT is scored. I know that Karen's going to talk later about how Lancaster uses BMAT scores in its admissions process, but just in general, BMAT is scored like this. For sections 1 and 2, you will get a score on the BMAT scale from 1 to 9. So the raw marks are converted to what we call a standardized score, and that's reported to 1 decimal place, for example 4.6. 5.3, etc. That's the same for section 1 and for section 2. And then for section 3, you'll get 2 scores, a number and a letter. The number will be for the quality of your content, where 5 is excellent and 0 is poor. And then you'll get a grade for the quality of your English, which is the opposite way round, with A being the best and E being the worst. I should have mentioned that all of the marking for the section 3 writing task is carried out by 2 independent markers. So it's not the case that just one person will see your essay. 2 people will mark your essay independently. They won't see each other's scores, and then your score will be a combination of those 2 examiners' marks. And if the examiners are out of tolerance with each other, then a 3rd marker will see your essay. We're often asked, what is a good score? Different institutions use BMAT in different ways and have different parameters for scores, but very generally, in very general terms, typical BMAT candidates will score about 5 on the 1 to 9 scale on sections 1 and 2. Good candidates will score 6, and very good candidates will score 7 and above. BMAT is hard. It's designed to be hard because it's meant to discriminate between lots of candidates who are very, very able, who will have scored very, very well, done very, very well in their GCSEs and have, very good, strong predictions for A-level or whatever final school leaving exams they're taking. So it's meant to be hard. When you start doing practice papers, and there's lots on our website, and Rachel's going to talk about that in a moment, you'll also be able to download from our website the conversion tables so that you can convert your raw score to a BMAT score. And don't be disheartened if you find that at first you're not scoring particularly highly. It is really tough, and particularly with section 1, it takes a while to really kind of understand how the questions work, what they're looking for. So hopefully you'll find with practice that your scores will improve. So that's all from me. I'm going to hand back to Rachel now, who's going to talk to you about some practical information about dates for BMAT this year, and also run you through some support materials. Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, hi everybody. There is one test date for BMAT in 2021, and that is the 3rd of November. We will be updating all of the key dates on our website for registration, which will open at the start of September. So please do check on our website for all of the key dates that you need in terms of registration, and all the registration information will be there as well. In terms of BMAT preparation, so I would just say that we do have a lot of materials on our website. As Karen mentioned at the start, they are all free. We always say you don't need to do an expensive course to succeed at BMAT. The people that run those courses, they are nothing to do with us. They haven't got any inside information from us. And we do not endorse them. We have all of the materials on our website for free. And with BMAT preparation, once you kind of start to have a look at the different questions and the different sections of the test, then you can decide on your own strategy for where you need to focus. Everybody's got very sort of different areas that they may find that they need to focus on for BMAT. It's a very sort of personal approach that you need to take once you've started to have a look at the questions. So just a few sort of tips to get you started here, really. On the left is the BMAT preparation guide. So this is a short guide. I think it's about 6 pages of a PDF in quite large print. Provides a bit of an overview of the test sections, kind of covering the areas that we've already covered today. But it also gives tips section by section on how you can approach your preparation. and also it links to all of the different documents, the different resources that relate to section 1, section 2, section 3. So that's a really good document to download. Then you can link off to the different documents and focus on the different areas where you may feel that you need to put a bit more preparation time in. On the right, we have the section 1 question guide. So Paul's shown us a couple of different question types, and there are a range of different question types across critical thinking and problem solving. They're all kind of quite sort of similar to each other, but they're asking you to do different kinds of things, like not just necessarily finding the main conclusion, but it may be identifying an assumption or a flaw, or that's in critical thinking. And then in problem solving, there are different things beyond finding procedures. There's also selecting relevant information, and this guide shows an example of each of those different types of questions along with a worked answer, so that you can see the kind of approach that you can take to tackle those different types of questions. For section 2, as we've said, it's testing your ability to apply your understanding of GCSE level biology, chemistry, physics and maths. But it goes along a content specification. So we have the BMAT section 2 specification listing the areas of biology, chemistry, physics and maths, the different topics that you should know about. These are listed in the guide that's shown here on the screen in the document on the left. And this is just a list of those different topics. And hopefully, as you look at that list, you'll think, yes, tick, 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 tick. I'm familiar with all of these areas. The screen on the right to that document with the little blue, green, purple and orange panels, this is an extended revision tool. So this is the same areas but expanded, so you can use this for revision. It goes into detail and the right depth that you need to know to apply to the questions. There are questions that help you also just quickly test your knowledge. So this is a really helpful resource to use alongside other things such as that test specification and also the section 2 papers. So you can sort of look at the question papers. If there are any areas you think, I'm not sure about, for example, the areas that Paul was looking at in that question earlier, you can think, right, I'll go into the right area of biology and I'll just have another look at that area. So you can use this very much as your tool to just kind of make sure that you're up to speed on those areas of science. Of course, you can use your school books and other resources on the internet, but do make sure that they're in the right topic areas that can be tested on by BMAT, which there's lots of information, as I've mentioned. On the right here is the section 3 marking criteria. So this is a short guide to how the examiners mark the essays on the quality of the content and the quality of the English. So this just lists the different band markings for those two areas and shows what you will need to do to get into those higher scoring bands. It's all in very sort of straightforward language. It's a really short document, but you might just find it really helpful, particularly if you maybe feel you haven't written an essay in some time, just the things that the markers are looking out for. And it also sort of shows in the lower banding areas where essays have weaknesses. So these are the sorts of things that you want to avoid. So it's things to avoid and things to aim to do when you're writing your essay. So this is a really helpful resource as well. And a really effective way to prepare, in fact, probably the most effective thing that you can do to replicate what you'll be doing on the day is to look at our past papers. So we've got many past papers because we've been running BMAT for many years. We're not saying by any means go through them all, not at all, but please do dip into them, use them to practice. There's plenty there. So, you know, just use them as you feel that it would be helpful. The most recent tests are the ones closest to the current specification. So the 2020 papers there, for instance, maybe save that for nearer the test date, do some slightly earlier ones and use the most recent paper you know, when you're kind of in the run up to taking the test, because that should really help you. We've got some worked examples, worked answers. We've got some sample essays for section 3 with examiner commentary. So these papers should be very, very useful for you to use. It's a good idea to just familiarise yourself with the questions. As Paul said, you get into a kind of a feeling of how the questions work in the different sections, and using these materials will really help you. So start to familiarise yourself with the materials when you're ready. And then as you get nearer to the test date, actually start doing a full section under test conditions. So no calculator, turn your phone off, put it out of the room, have no distractions, and sit there and try to replicate what you would be doing on the day, so that you get a really good idea of how quickly you have to work. As Paul mentioned, on both of those sections, it is quite time pressured. That is part of time management, is part of BMAT. So practicing that is really important. Just a few FAQs that we sometimes get asked by students. Does it matter that I don't study physics anymore? Well, if you've dropped physics, you are absolutely not alone. And as we've mentioned, the level of the science that's required for section 2 is GCSE level knowledge. So go to those materials that I mentioned, go to the test specification, look at the topic areas across all, not just physics, but across all of biology, chemistry, physics and maths. Use that section 2 guide to revise any areas that you need to. Look at the question papers, see how they're testing that knowledge. Go back to the guide or to your books if you need to. You know, you're thinking of this nice and early already, so you know there's plenty of time. If you're not doing subjects where you write essays, as Paul said, this essay isn't a test of you know, flowery language. This is a communication exercise and a communication of ideas. It's using skills that you've already gained. You may be doing report writing in some of your current courses. That may be quite helpful, and also in other schoolwork that you've done, such as GCSE English. And again, as I've mentioned, you know, please do look at those marking criteria, and you'll get a really good idea of the kind of thing that we're looking for. As I've mentioned, we've got the previous practice papers. We've got sample essays with examiner commentary and marks. The marking criteria, I'll just mention again, and we've got other guidance as well. We've got some videos on YouTube of our examiners giving some tips on different areas. Underneath it lists the kind of things that they're talking about. Should you use examples in your essay? Are there any do's and don'ts? Things like that. So those are really helpful videos to watch as well. If you get access arrangements for your school exams, we do offer access arrangements in line with those for BMAT. And like the registration information and so on, that is all available on our website if that applies to you. So please do take a look, and those will need to be put in with your registration for the test. If you can't afford the test this year, BMAT, the standard fee, so we have a period where there's a standard fee from 1st September to the 1st of October, that is £61. Then there is a final 2 weeks, and the absolute cut-off will be the 15th of October. And there's an additional £34 fee, because by this point we've started our admin processes. So please do make sure that you're registered early in that window when you know you want to take the test. All of this information is on the website. But we do offer a reimbursement of test fees to people who meet certain financial criteria if they can't afford the test, because it's really important to us and to all the universities that use the test that it isn't a barrier to people applying to study medicine. So finally, please don't panic about the test. I'm really hoping that this session today is helping you sort of see what the test is about, and you know, make you feel like you've made some progress already, which you will definitely have done. Knowing what's in the test is really important, and practicing is really, really important too, particularly when you're ready under time conditions. And as Paul mentioned, you know, don't be disheartened. Keep going. It really is just a matter of finding your groove with it, kind of getting your own strategy, and just keeping on going, and hopefully that should help you improve. And lastly, this is really a great opportunity to prove to the universities that use BMAT what you can do. So take this chance to show your potential. Good luck.
Right, we have one little question, I think.
Yes.
So, will the essay be virtual? I think they mean, will the whole test be virtual or online, or will we go back to writing on paper?
At the moment, we are just making the sort of final kind of confirmation of details. Last year we went online. We are hoping to do the same this year, but this is quite early in our cycle, relatively early in our cycle for us. So we're just making the sort of final details, but everything that you need to know about BMAT will be updated on our website as soon as it is confirmed. So I would just really say to students, not just the BMAT website, but for university application generally, check websites for all of the latest information, because obviously we're in these sort of strange times. But yeah, everything will be confirmed on the website as soon as it's all completely agreed.
Which, sorry, just to add, I think will be over the summer, no later than sort of August, really. There should be final confirmation on our website of that. Thanks,
Paul.
So thank you very much to Paul and Rachel for telling us all about BMAT. We're now going to move on to the section with two of our students. Now, I could definitely see that one was here, but I'm just going to check whether the other student has arrived yet. Bear with me a second. I think. Nidia,
Yeah.
So Nidia and Helen, do you want to share your slides, or do you want me to share the slides for you?
I think you'll be better if you share them, Karen.
That's perfect. Just give me 2 seconds and I'll get them up for you. Do you and Helen want to introduce yourself while I do that?
Yep. Here. So hi everyone. My name's Nidhi. I was here for the virtual open day, so some of you might recognise me. But yes, I'm a first year. I'm going on to second year. And I'm just here to talk with Helen a little bit about our experiences with the BMAT.
Hi everyone, I'm Helen. I'm also a first year going into second year, and I'm also here to talk about my experience. I reckon mine's a little different to Nidhi's as well, so there's two different sides of the story you're going to hear, so that's going to be good, hopefully.
Thanks for that. So Nidhi, I think this is your slide.
Yeah, so I think when you're going into year 13, I think the biggest thing is you've got a lot of things to handle. You've got your personal statement, you've probably got your your exams, internal exams going on at the moment. So I think it's really important that you prioritize what how as it comes. What I wish I did was I wish I let all my teachers knew that I was a medical applicant. So if, say, I didn't do well on one test, they would be a bit forgiving, and they wouldn't be worrying about if I'm not revising properly, because it is very time consuming in that sense. I think for section 1 of the BMAT, like I've said, this may not work for you, but what I did was I used to read what the question asked me, and then I would go back and look at the paragraph and see, okay, what are the key things that I need to look at, and then I would highlight and make sure for section 1 to really read the questions, because it's very much it's to apply your critical thinking. Yeah, so read the question properly, because the answers and the multiple choice can be quite confusing. Also, when you're revising for section 2, I'm sure you've probably heard of this multiple times, but look at the BMAT website, because it's really good. You don't really need to make any revision notes or anything like that. They have study guides for your GCSE content, like your 3 sciences and maths. So it's really what I did, I just printed all of them out, and then I just highlighted and went over them, all of them, just to see if there's any things that I needed to look over, what I'm confident with, what I'm not confident with, gauge what your strong points and what your weak points are. I think with that, when you're starting to revise, it's important that you like choose a section that is like easy for you at the start, so you like get a good feel of it. So I think when I first started revising, I took like a quiz, like a paper, like an actual paper, and I saw, okay, which section do I need to work most on, which section I don't need to work most on, and then I kind of gauged, okay, I'm quite good at section 2 in my sciences, so I started with the sciences, and then I worked backwards. So then I worked on my weaker topics, so my physics, because I didn't take physics for A level. So definitely, like, there's some people that say that like just don't go over physics content, but it's really important that you go over every single of the sciences. Yeah, and yeah, there's no need for you to book any like BMAT courses. There's really no need. Like the BMAT website is fully sufficient for you to like do really well. So yeah, don't be persuaded by going to these courses. Also, I've got like this picture of the ISC medical book. So I think I started with the book, and then as it got closer to the exam date, I started using the papers. So the books kind of like gave me an idea of what the questions could be. I think most of them I used for like essays, and the science questions, because they tend to be quite similar. Yeah, I that's just how I did it. But choose have a look at the book and see if it's better to use the website first. Completely up to you. And then for section 3, what I did was I pretty much got every single paper on the BMAT website, and I did all of the essays. So I always did it in like the paper that they provide you, because you can't go over like over the limit. So it's really important that you practice on like the sheet that they provide you in the actual exam. And I think before like writing the essays out, I sort of like had like mind map for each of the 3 questions, because the style of the questions tend to be quite similar. So just have a rough plan. It shouldn't really take you that long, time-wise, to write the essay. I think you take time for like planning it well, and then writing it shouldn't be much of a problem. In terms of exam technique, I think you should, when you're revising, you should definitely see the questions that you're getting wrong. And because on the BMAT website, you have like a question, like you have like explained answers. So you should definitely look over them and see like where you're getting the questions wrong. You can also see like someone's put on the chat, if you make a mistake, you just have to cross it out and like write over it, because you really can't like go wrong with the essay. So have like really nice, neat handwriting that is legible for the examiners. And yeah, try to minimize the amount of mistakes that you do. So that's why planning is really important. Also, I remember for physics, I had some friends that like did physics A level, and I just asked some questions if I didn't understand a certain question. So that's up to you if you have friends, but it's okay because the study guide is sufficient enough. But I think I'm going to hand over to Helen, and she can tell you a little bit more about her experience.
Okay, thank you, Nidhi. So Yeah, my experiences, I think, summed up by those 3 pictures, kind of. I made some pretty poor decision-making processes, and essentially I found myself with 3 days to go deciding that I was going to take the BMAT after all. So that probably isn't wise, and so I would suggest doing more planning beforehand. But my experience with that meant that I was quite good at compartmentalizing and preparing in specific ways to get to be able to maximize your how effective you can be in your studying. So generally, don't panic study. If you have no mental energy after A levels, it's exhausting, you're struggling, and you want to study, do 5 questions under time conditions and then move on, have some dinner, and relax. If you have enough time, you can slowly spread out your work, and you'll get quicker, you'll get better by doing timed questions. Also, if you look at the website again and the books again, look up all of the available questions that are, you'll find that there's a lot of overlap over the years of what will come up, like puzzle questions, critical thinking questions, the questions that have been up in these in this presentation beforehand. Those are all likely to come up. So if you're good at answering those questions, then you'll have more of an advantage over doing those questions. So I would recommend doing questions, and also all of you here can do well easily, and you can answer all the questions. It's the time frame that you have in the exams that are going to put pressure on, that are going to make it even harder for you to answer and answer correctly. So if when you're studying you put them under time conditions, you'll get quicker and you'll be more prepared for in the exams. And I guess the main other top tip that I had was for the writing section, and that is that if you have flashbacks to all of the GCSE questions, GCSE English, GCSE, all of that, where they're getting you to put in metaphors, put in similes, use flowery language, all of that, semicolons, all of that, don't do that. They want you to answer the question, and they want you to answer it plainly, I guess. So if you're not confident writing as well using all of the semicolons and ellipses and all of those, if that doesn't generally work for your writing style, don't put them in. Just write with good grammar and put your point across, and make sure to answer in the argument and the counter argument, and then sum it all up at the end, and you'll have plenty of time to do that. So write a draft beforehand, like Nidia was saying, and that one will be great and it'll be good. And if you've used good grammar, they're going to give you the A mark at the end, and it'll be great, and you've got yourself a good mark there. So it's all about compartmentalizing the different sections to make it less of a mountain to climb when you're studying. So just one question at a time, one thing at a time, you'll get quicker and better. And yeah, work smarter, not harder, So, yeah.
I'd also like to add, for essays, the grammar part is getting the A, A, B, C, D. The A part is quite easy. You just need to not it has to make sense what you're writing, and you'll easily get the A. For getting the marks, I think what I did was I also read a bit around the subject. So I read the scientist magazines and all of them, and I think I use one part, I don't know if it's the best use of my time, but if you want to get those higher marks, go for it. But I think I would say the essay is probably one of the easiest out of the 3 sections.
Thank you for that, Needy and Helen. Does anyone have any questions for the students before they go? You can either post your question in the chat, or if you've got the hand up function, you can put your hand up. So Needy and Helen, would you be able to stay just for a few moments in case people think of questions while I go on with my slides? You can turn your cameras off, and I'll go on with the next bit of the talk. But if anyone thinks of questions for the students, then feel free to ask. Thanks very much.
That's okay.
Helen and Needy.
No worries.
Okay, so it's over to me now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we use your BMAT score in our selection process here at Lancaster. So what I'm going to cover today is a quick recap of our selection process. So most of you, I think, were at our open day on Saturday, and Dr. Phillips would have gone through our selection process with you. So I'm just going to quickly recap it. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we use BMAT. I'm going to talk about what we mean by total score, how we calculate your total score. I'm going to talk a little bit about what at Lancaster would be an acceptable BMAT score and might mean that you're likely to be invited for interview. And then, as we've said before, if you've got any questions, you can post them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end. I can see that we do have one question, which maybe is a good one for the students. How much time would you recommend to put aside to prepare for BMAT? So Helen and Needy, how much time do you think you spent preparing for BMAT?
I think it depends because there's two sittings, if I remember. You have the August sitting and like either the September, October. So if you're doing the October sitting, which I think what I did.
There's only going to be a November sitting this year.
Oh, okay. So I think I would say like little and often, like don't spend hours like dedicating days to like just doing BMAT prep, because you will need to do your A-level content on the side, plus your, like, as I said, like drafts of your personal statements as well. So definitely I would say approximately 2 hours. That's how much I did, but I also did some prep. Like I definitely did some essay practice over the summer, so you can always get started with essay prep. Like there's no harm in that. But with questions, I spent like around 2 hours, I would say, a day.
Every day, but for how long?
Like until the like I think I started, I would say
when
like
you went back after
when
you went back after the summer, do you mean?
Yeah, like I would say like a good two months is enough time. I think a bit over that is you're gonna burn out very quickly.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, little and often, I would say.
Okay, thanks for that, Needy. So Helen, you said you had a bit of a crash course for BMAT just because you made your decision to take it quite late on.
Yeah, I had a very different experience with that. So I would definitely not recommend doing that. Again, I think Needy's quite right in the little and often. Do as much as you can in the day, because with A levels, everyone knows that it's just a huge step up, year 12 to year 13, and you'll be feeling that as well as feeling the pressure with personal statements, keeping up with friends. You've just been out of lockdown, like lots of things are going against you. So don't beat yourself up or try to like work into the night or anything like that. Just try and do as little bits, maybe like 20 minutes at a time. Just do questions, just try to write a little bit of an essay, that kind of thing, at a time, then have a break, do something else. But yeah, I guess start thinking about it, like going back to school a bit earlier if you can, but don't dedicate all your summer to it, because there's more to life, you know? And
you definitely don't want to be, if you have to spend all summer preparing for BMAT, then I think you're going to find medical school quite challenging.
Yeah.
So ideally, that she's read 4 to 6 weeks of practice is the best amount, and that sounds sort of what Needy said as well. Kind of after you go back to school after the summer and before, in the run up to when the test is, which is usually the end of October, beginning of November. So that's probably 6 weeks of doing like an hour or two in the evening. So that sounds about right. And I guess you start off by familiarising yourself with the format of the questions, and then you have to try and do stuff under time conditions. I think that was you that said that, Helen, that you need to kind of do it under time conditions. So, but you can kind of work up to that, can't you? Anyway, thanks for that question, folks. So if we move on to our selection process. So at Lancaster, there's a 4-stage selection process. It starts off looking at your academic grades, so it looks at what GCSEs you've already achieved, what you're predicted to achieve in your A-levels. Then we look at your biomedical admissions test score at stage 2. And what we do is everyone who has met our GCSE and predicted A-level requirements passes stage 1 and goes into stage 2. The vast majority of applicants meet our academic entry requirements. And so what we do is we use the sort of BMAT score as an independent indicator of your aptitude for studying medicine, as a way to differentiate between applicants who are all pretty good on paper. And that is what then determines who gets invited to interview. And then the interview is really looking at non-academic skills and attributes. And then your offers are made on the basis of your multiple mini interview performance. And fitness to practice, which I'm not going to talk about today, is something that comes at the very end. If you're made an offer, then we have to make sure that your health and criminal background are such that you're fit. So today I'm really just going to be talking about biomedical admissions test. If you want to ask questions about the rest, I'm happy to take them at the very end, but the next few slides are not going to cover the other bits of our selection process. So somebody asked, why did we use BMAT? So as I said on the previous slide, most applicants meet our academic entry requirements. And when it comes to that, we then have to say, well, we could either put all the academic entry requirements up, or we can find another way that's looking at whether people are suited to studying medicine at Lancaster Medical School. And BMAT is a different and an independent indicator, so it's not dependent as much on what school you went to or what A-levels you're studying. It's more looking at whether you've got how well you've learned your GCSE science and maths, which is like your foundation for what you're going to do going for your A-levels and forward. And like, do you have the ability to express yourself articulately in writing? And do you have those kind of like thinking skills to be able to kind of puzzle stuff out? Because a lot of things in medicine are about puzzling things out and making sense of complex information. The way that we deliver our curriculum in Lancaster is through problem-based learning. So in problem-based learning, you're given a written scenario, and you have to try and work out what that scenario tells you, what it doesn't tell you, and what it's prompting you to learn. And again, the sorts of skills you need to do that, to kind of look at a scenario and work out what it is that it's telling you, is quite similar to the skills you need for that thinking skills section in BMAT. Then if you think about section 2 is how well have you learned your science and maths, because you absolutely cannot learn the medical curriculum by factual recall. So if you've learned your GCSE science and maths in such a way as you just have learned it in factual recall and can't really apply that knowledge in a different context, in a different format of question, then the chances are that you've not developed those kind of that underpinning understanding of science and maths that you need to carry you through into medicine. And the final section, section 3, which is basically, can you develop a logical argument? That's probably the basis of all of the courseworks that you're going to do while you're at Lancaster Medical School, if you had to kind of really distill it down to what it is that we're looking for. So those 3 sections in BMAT are testing skills that are useful for what you're going, how you're going to be taught and how you're going to learn at Lancaster Medical School. And actually, by preparing for BMAT, you'll actually be developing and improving those skills so that you're better prepared for studying at Lancaster Medical School, just by having prepared for BMAT. So that's why we use BMAT. And somebody said, why don't you use UCAT? Well, we looked at both, but we just felt that BMAT was a better aligned with the skills that we want to assess before we get you to to interview, because the interview is where we assess those kind of non-academic skills and attributes. So the next thing is, how do we calculate, what do we call the total score? Everybody uses, I think Paul Crump said this earlier, every medical school kind of uses the BMAT scores in different ways. Some only look at section 1 and 2, some don't really look at section 3 score at all. Brighton Sussex will look at all 3 sections, but also will include your quality of English score. So for us, we just take the scores for section 1, 2 and 3, and Paul explained that the quality of English is in sort of alphabetical grade, A, B, C, D, E. I think Brighton Sussex convert that into some kind of number and then include it in their total score. We don't include the quality of English score in our total BMAT score. And that's because when we first started using BMAT, we discovered that practically all of the applicants have got an A or a B in that quality of English score. So that kind of reflects what Nadie says. You know, if you can write in relatively good English, you're going to get a good quality of English score. So we take those 3 separate section scores, add them up, and that is your total score. So that means there's a little bit of compensation allowable between sections. If you do better on section 1, you could afford to do slightly worse on section 2 or slightly worse on section 3, because we're not looking at a minimum cutoff for each section. It's your total score that counts. So what we do is, everyone who meets the academic entry requirements, they move forward into stage 2, and then they're ranked according to their total BMAT score. And then what we do is, the people who rank at the top, who have the highest BMAT scores, they're invited to interview. And this ranking allows us to differentiate between applicants who basically have all met the academic entry requirements. They've all got good GCSEs and they're all predicted good A-level grades. And as I said before, it's the top ranking individuals who are invited to interview. And then the interview is very separate, and it's testing completely non-academic skills and attributes. And that means that we're through our selection process, we're assessing a mix of the academic and non-academic skills that you need to be a successful medical student. So that's how your BMAT score has an impact. It's got quite a big impact, in that if you have a BMAT score below our cutoff, you won't be invited to interview, even if you've got really good GCSEs and really good predicted A levels. And that's because everybody does. That's the whole point. They have all met our academic entry requirements by the time they get to the BMAT ranking stage. So next, I was going to give you an indication as to what kind of score would typically get you to interview. So here I have got the distribution of scores for sections 1, 2 and 3 in last year's BMAT. And Paul said to you that a typical, so a kind of average student, would get about 5 in sections 1 and 2. I can't remember what he said for section 3. What I can tell you is that for the past few years, if you get a total score of more than 10.5, the chances are that you will be invited to interview at Lancaster. So I think our cutoff in terms of BMAT is perhaps lower, but then BMAT is used for some of the most selective medical schools in the country. So for Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial and UCL, we're not quite as selective as that. We're still selective, but you know, we can afford to consider those with slightly lower BMAT scores. So a total score of 10.5, that might be a score of about 4 in section 1, about 4 in section 2, and 2.5 or greater in section 3. So you can see that it's slightly below average on all 3 of those tests would get you to interview at Lancaster. So I think Paul said to you that if you go on to their website, they give you the conversion tables. So if you have scored this much out of 27, that would translate into a BMAT score of 8. But I think a score of about 5 in sections 1 and 2 is usually getting about 50% of the questions correct. So if you're looking at a score of 4 and above, then actually if you're getting 45% of the questions correct when you do your practice papers, you're probably going to be okay. It's at the lower end of our cutoff, so it's probably riskier. But if you get a 5, if you get a 5 in sections 1 and 2 and a relatively good section score in section 3, you would definitely be called for interview at Lancaster. So hopefully that will reassure you that even although BMAT's hard and you don't maybe get all the questions correct when you do the past paper, it gives you a benchmark as to what you really need to be able to achieve to have a good chance of being called for interview. So thank you for listening. We've covered quite a lot of information this evening. Does anyone have any questions? You can post your questions in the chat, or you can stick your hand up, or you could just unmute and say what you wanted to ask. If you do think of any questions after tonight, you can email them through medicine@lancaster.ac.uk. That's our general kind of inquiries inbox. So you can post any questions there if you think about them later on after tonight's session has finished.